The silence is broken by hoofbeats, rapidly pounding the floor of the forest. A mud-spattered messenger comes to a castle of grey stone. He rushes up the stairs to a chamber where a woman waits, heavy with child. When she reads his words, she sinks to the ground, felled by shock. The woman, Herzeloide, has just been told that her husband Gamuret has been killed in a far-off land. The thrill of battle and tournament had been his ruling passion, something he could never put aside. This outcome was what she had always dreaded. 14 days later, Herzeloide gave birth to a boy child. What if he grows up like his father, like all men, always thirsting for glory and conquest? Then my heart would be broken a second time. Could there be some way to prevent this? What if I were to take a small band of my people and go to some hidden corner of my lands and make sure that my son never sees or hears of knights, jousting, or warfare? So she fled to a remote homestead, hidden from the rest of the world by the dense forest called Soltane. He must not hear a single word about knights or their weapons, she commanded her servants. The boy grew, running wild in the woods, keen of eye, strong of arm, but soft-hearted. Often he followed the huntsmen upon whom they all relied for food. Their swiftness and skill enthralled him. Very soon he had fashioned his own bow and arrow. Creeping noiselessly along the edge of a field with bow in hand, he saw a bird hovering above. He aimed and loosed his arrow. The suddenly silent bird plummeted with a soft thud onto the ground. But as soon as he held the ruffled body in his hands, the boy burst into tears of remorse. His mother, Herzeloide, rushed to the scene. She could not bear to see his tenderness, knowing how easily it could lead to pain. "The birds are upsetting my son," she said to the hunters. "You must rid the forest of them." But her son called out, "Mother, our men should not be hunting the birds. What harm have they done?" As soon as she heard these words, she glimpsed her folly and sighed with a weary smile. If God has given the birds their song, then who am I to take it away? The boy fixed her with his gaze. Who is this God person you talk of?" he demanded. "Well, my beautiful son," she responded, faltering for an answer, He is more splendid than any of us, and he gives us help when we need it." These words the boy took away with him and pondered long. Passing his days thus, he grew towards young manhood, though still seeming more of a child than do most children. Until the day when, as he wandered among the trees, he felt the ground tremble to the sound of hoofbeats. He looked up and saw God coming towards him along the track, or several gods rather, for there were 4 of them. Such they must be, for never had he seen any one as splendid, and this was the word his mother had used to describe God. "Out of my way, idiot!" yelled one as the young man stood there open-mouthed. "Come on then, God," demanded the latter, still remembering his mother's tuition. "Give me some help." "Oh, we are not God," responded another, kinder than the first. "We are knights." The youth lingeringly caressed the pommel of the man's sword and avidly eyed every inch of his apparel. Then eagerly he asked, How could I become a knight?" "Well," said the other, humoring him, "you'd have to go to Arthur the king and ask him to make you one. Who knows, maybe he will. You certainly have the looks to appeal to the ladies. But make space, we have to go now." That night the youth sought out his mother. "I am going to become a knight," he declared. "I am going to Arthur the king so he can make me one." Herzeloide recognized the look of iron resolve in his eyes. Once more, just as she had done when she heard of Gamuret's death, she sank to the ground as if a blade had pierced her through. When she revived a little, though, her thoughts raced. "He really means it. I can read it in his eyes. I am not going to be able to stop him. But can I make sure that his efforts come to nothing? Yes, if I persuade him to wear such ridiculous garb that no one will take seriously his claim to knighthood." "Here, dear son," she said, "I have made you special clothes for the journey." She handed him a shirt of sacking, cut short at the elbows, and a pair of rough, clumpish boots. To ride, she offered him a sway-backed and decrepit old pony. But when she saw him thus arrayed, she was even more fearful. "Perhaps I can arrange it," she thought desperately, "so that instead of falling into danger out there, he might meet people who would cherish him and care for him. Perhaps I can give him advice that will help him to find them." She turned to him. "Listen, beloved son," she said to him earnestly. "If on your journey you meet a man grey in the years of his head, who is willing to be your teacher, then listen to all he says, for such a man will surely be wise. As for women, if you find one who wants your arms around her and lets you have her ring, then do not hesitate one moment to take it, for you have discovered the greatest treasure in the world." Then she watched him going away. "Make sure you greet everyone politely," she called in a last effort to prepare him. "I will, mother," came the faint reply. As he vanished into the trees, she felt she had lost everything she had ever had in this life. As the mist rose the next morning and golden vapor swirled through the forest, he crossed a stream and came to a place where an exquisitely fashioned tent was pitched. The young man slid from his pony wide-eyed and pulled aside the tent flap and stepped in. Whatever wonders he had seen in his short life were nothing compared with what he looked upon now. He saw eyelids closed in sleep, tender lips parted a little, a gleaming ring about a slender finger. He looked, though he did not know it, upon Yeshute, the lovely wife of the Duke Aurelius, who had just lately ridden from that spot. The youth, devotedly following the words of advice with which his mother had bade him farewell, without hesitation he clambered onto the couch to clasp the woman in his arms, at the same time tugging the ring from her finger. She woke with a gasp, flinched, and struggled to push him away. "Get off me!" she hissed. He said, "I'm terribly hungry," in an attempt to give a name to all the sensations that occurred in him. "Well, I won't be your meal," Yeshute said. "Take this apple instead." "My husband will be back at any moment, and if he sees you here, he will be furious," she said, hoping to scare him away. "If you don't want to see him upset, "I will leave," replied the other generously, and stepped out through the tent flap. "Leave my ring!" she yelled, but the puzzling answer came back. "My mother told me I must keep it." And he was gone. Hardly a moment had passed before Aurelius came riding back into the clearing. He saw quite clearly tracks in the dew-soaked grass, leading to his wife's tent and then away from it again. "Your lover and I," he fumed while entering the tent, "have only just failed to meet, but meet we shall." "No, no," she wailed, and then let fall from her lips the disastrous words. It was just a youth I've never seen before." Raging, Aurelius began to stride to and fro. Seizing the bed cover, he tore it nearly into two. "This is what you will wear in future," he bellowed, holding up the tattered bedding. Thus he meant to parade his wife, disgraced and scorned before the eyes of all the world. The youth, meanwhile, heard a piercing shriek which echoed among the leaves, and coming to a clearing, he saw a young woman cradling in her lap the head of a knight who lay before her in the stillness of death. "God help you," he offered, then explaining, "My mother told me to greet everyone politely." Then his manner switched. "Tell me who has done this thing," he demanded, "and I will go after him and do the same to him." The young woman, Sigune, looked up, touched that one so green should be so ready to help. "What is your name?" she asked wonderingly. "Beloved son, I was sometimes called," he replied, "or else dear son or beautiful son." At these words she began to gaze at him intently. "I think I know who you are," she said, thoughtful. "Your mother is my aunt, Herzeloide. This man died defending lands that by right of birth are yours. He had declared his love for me, and how bitterly I now regret that I delayed in returning it." "Then tell me who has done this to him," the young man persisted, "so that I can go after him." "I can see," said Sigune, "that you have the ability to go straight to the center of any matter you come upon. So I declare your name from now on should be Parzival, which means straight through the middle. I once heard your mother say that was what she intended." "Yes, if you think that's a good one," came the other. But now tell me where whoever did this has gone, so I can chase after him." He took that path," she answered, pointing with careful deliberation in exactly the opposite direction to the one the attacker had taken, for she was quite certain that otherwise harm would befall one who seemed so unknowing. Soon he came to the walls of a city, and cantering towards him from that direction, a knight red from the tip of his lance to the last hair of his great horse's tail. He pulled up before Parzival. "Would you do me a service," he asked, "if you are going into that city?" "Oh, God help you," replied the other. "My mother told me to greet everyone politely. Yes, I'll do the service. I am going to Arthur to ask him to make me a knight." The horseman suppressed a smile. "Then take a message from me, Ether, to Arthur, who presides there. Tell him that I lay claim to the throne of Britain and will fight for it against any champion he sends to face me." "I think I can remember that," said the young man, concentrating hard, willing to help, but far from used to the terms he was hearing. When he came through the city gate, his sacking suit, ancient pony, and wide eyes immediately attracted a great crowd of gawpers. "God help you all!" he blurted at them. "My mother told me to greet everyone politely. Which way to Arthur?" Soon he passed into the great hall and saw dazzling throngs of people, sumptuously clothed, who mingled there. Among them stood the graceful form of the Lady Kunaware, who never laughed. A sorcerer had once foretold of her that it would remain so until she laid eyes on the man who would gain the highest of all honors. Also, there was the dumb jester Antenor, of whom the same man had said that he would never speak until Kunaware laughed. "Arthur, King Arthur, God help you! I bring a message from him outside the gates. He wants to fight someone, and I want to have clothes and gear just like his." There were sniggers and titters all around the hall. Arthur, however, eyed him shrewdly from the high table. "It may just be that you have the makings of a knight," he spoke, "but that would only be decided after careful consideration, and certainly not before tomorrow." "But if I fought him really well, then couldn't I have his gear?" insisted Parzival, and again there was a wave of sniggering. "That would be much too dangerous for you, my young cock sparrow," Arthur replied, not unkindly. But the knight Kai, the king's ill-tempered steward, had been watching all this and was much irritated by the way in which this half-wit seemed to earn so much attention. Now he saw a way to make him come to grief. "My king, surely you would not have it said that Arthur refused a heartfelt entreaty, if it was in his power to grant it." "That's right," chimed in the young newcomer, understanding only that Kai was urging the king to agree to his request. Arthur looked from one to the other, saw one face full of unaccustomed encouragement, the other of enormous eagerness. Whatever his misgivings, he felt propelled by some secret momentum in these events, and with a resigned nod he gave his assent. But as Parzival moved towards the doorway, a peal of laughter cascaded through the air, and those nearby turned in astonishment, for it had come from the throat of Kunaware, the lady who never laughed. "You have refused to honor any of us with your laughter," thundered Kai, the steward, as he lurched in fury towards her. "And now you laugh at this numbskull." He grasped her hair, he wrapped it around his wrist, he raised his staff, and he struck her on the back. Though "She is beaten now because of him," came a voice. "One day, Kay, the same will happen to you." And those close by gasped, startled once more, for these words had fallen from the lips of Antenor, the dumb jester. Parzival, pressed towards the doorway by the excited crowd, looked back and saw all this take place. Knowing that he was somehow the cause, he instantly felt compelled to find some way of making amends. When Parzival's pony plodded up to the spot where Ether was waiting, Parzival said, "None of them wanted to fight you, so they sent me." "They have sent you?" he echoed, doubting his own ears. But they immediately lashed out at each other, tumbling sprawling upon the grass. Filled with rage, the youth scrambled to his feet, grasping his sword. He had grown up running free in the forest, strong of arm and keen of eye, and immediately the sword passed through Ether's helmet. Ether crashed to the ground, his brains pierced, lifeless. Scarcely knowing what he was doing, Parzival then began to fumble with the straps and buckles of Ether's armor. Eventually, Parzival stood, clad from head to foot in red armor, and before him the great war horse. Instantly, the horse lunged forward into a headlong gallop. Over humps and bumps it leaped. Through the branches of the trees they crashed. Nor did Parzival have any idea how to stop his horse, and so it galloped on, through thickets and glades, over hillsides, through streams, stretching into long strides, where the going was straight and flat. The sun had crossed the sky, and the horse sped on, until even Parzival's strong body cried out for an end to the jolting and rocking. Only as evening approached did the red horse slow down to a walk of its own accord, just as they neared a sturdy castle. Outside its gate stood a man, grey-haired, but vigorous, with his falcon upon his wrist. "My mother told me," blurted out Parzival instantly, "that a man grey in the years of his head would be wise and be able to teach me. Will you? Can you tell me what knights do? How do I make this horse stop when I want it to? How do I take this armor off for the night? And my mother told me to keep any ring a woman let me have. But I don't know what to do with it. Will you tell me?" The other eyed the newcomer with puzzled interest, and then he spoke. "Your manners and your horsemanship are appalling, but I can see that your heart is open. Come in and be welcome." This was Gurnemans, well known as a tutor of young men in the ways of knighthood. He led Parzival to the courtyard, where they were met by a fresh-faced girl of about 16. "This is my daughter Liaise," said Gurnemans. "I entrust him to you, my dear. Make him comfortable for the night." So they led Parzival to a bedchamber, where Liaise and one of her friends began to unbuckle and remove the metal plates, while the others poured buckets of steaming water into a bath. They found his figure admirably well formed, but his manner odd. For when he had clambered awkwardly into the bath, when they massaged and lathered his bruised body, exclaiming, "What a fine shoulders you have!" and other enthusiastic commands, he became ever more shy and confused. When at last they waited for him to arise, he remained sitting resolutely upright in the water, until finally he blurted nervously, "I must have a towel!" So, stifling their mischievous laughter, they handed one over and left him to himself. The next morning, Gurnemans began to teach Parzival the knightly codes of conduct. "You must," he instructed, "stop talking about your mother all the time. You are now an adult. Also, it is most unseemly to shower people with questions as soon as you come to a new place. This must definitely stop. Otherwise people will think you are a half-wit." Much else Gurnemans explained. At one point he said, "A knight may seek fame and the rapture of victory. He may feel thrilled by the magnificence of his armor, his gear, and his horse. But in the end, he must know that victory or defeat are granted to him by the grace of God." And at the end, he added a last more wise lesson. "All I can tell you about women," he concluded, "is this. Man and woman are bound together as closely as the sun and the day itself. They grow from one stem." The next day, Gurnemans led his pupil out to the turf, where several young men were already at practice with swords and shields. Gurnemans handed the same to Parzival. Then he called to another of the young men, "Fight against him! Let's see how he does." So the two young men thundered at each other and met with a crash and a thud as a body hit the ground. The one who remained standing was Parzival. "You," Gurnemans uttered, turning to another of his pupils, "try against him also." So Parzival faced his second opponent. They waited for the sign, and again it was Parzival who won. This happened with a third, fourth, and fifth opponent. Gurnemans turned away, pondering deeply. For many strenuous months, the training continued. Then came the evening that Gurnemans called his pupil over to the fireside and said, "Young man, never have I seen anyone with greater natural aptitude for battle and the joust than you." His gaze moved back and forth between the flames and his listener's face. "3 sons I have lost on the field of war. You already know my daughter. I urge you to stay, marry her, and become the heir to all that is mine." "My teacher," Parzival replied, "I know this is the greatest honor you could offer anyone, but I cannot accept it. How can I know my true worth as a knight until I have faced real enemies out in the world? How can I know I deserve a woman's hand? For the time being at least, I must refuse the honor you offer me." Gurnemans recognized the determination in the other's eye. "With those words," he said gravely, "I lose a 4th son. But so it must be." Soon after, Parzival rode out through the gates of Gurnemans' castle towards the trees. For many hours, Parzival let his horse pick the path. In this way, he reached the further edge of the forest and looked out on a great walled city. Before it, an army was encamped and waiting to overrun the city. The warring forces had wearily left off fighting just before Parzival arrived, and he rode unhindered towards a gate. It was opened from within by watchful men-at-arms, who seemed to assume he had come to join them, and stood back to let him pass. As he rode along the streets of that city, he saw on all sides sad eyes, hungry faces, broken weapons, and dented armor. "Come this way, sir," beckoned one man. Parzival was led up stairways and through halls until he stood before the young queen of that city. And at that moment, something very new awakened inside him. It went far beyond the strange hunger Yeshuta had aroused in him as he lay beside her in her tent. The sight of this other queen stirred his heart to its very roots. In spite of this, he well remembered the rules his teacher Gurnemans had laid down. He didn't just refrain from asking questions, he uttered not a word. "He can't like the sight of me very much," thought Conduiramours, the queen. "Maybe our lack of food is affecting my looks. Or could it be," she then thought, noticing his hesitant manner, "that he thinks it's impolite to speak before his hostess? Tell me, sir," she asked, "where you have traveled from?" So he told her of Gurnemans. "He is my dear uncle," she forced a smile, "and how I wish he was here now. But perhaps your coming is just as fortunate as if he'd come himself." After a small meal, he was conducted to a bedchamber in which he soon sank into a sound sleep. But in the depths of the night, his door opened cautiously, and through it crept Conduiramours in her nightgown of white silk. She had found her command over her own actions suddenly weak. Nearly sick with the worry of ruling a town besieged by a strong enemy, she longed for company and comfort. And she felt herself irresistibly drawn to this strange young man. Torn by her own impulses, she sank to her knees beside his bed and began to sob with vexation. He stirred, blinked, then opened his eyes very wide and sat bolt upright. "If I get out of bed," he dithered, "maybe you can get under the covers, and then you won't have to kneel there shivering on the floor." "We could both be warm under the same covers," she whispered, "as long as you can show restraint." The implications lost on him, quite unaware of her full meaning, Parzival mumbled in bewilderment and made room. Then he found their bodies alongside each other, and it felt glorious, but very strange. And then she told him her story. "My father was king of this city of Belle Ripiere. When he died only months ago, I became queen. But then the king Clemide laid claim to both the city and myself. I am at my wits' end. Over half the men have died defending the walls. But I'd rather throw myself from those walls than deliver myself to him." "Tomorrow," responded Parzival with wrinkled brow, "I will do whatever I can." And they fell asleep side by side. In the bright morning, as Clemide's entire army stood arrayed before the city, Parzival rode out through the gates alone. "She sends a champion," commanded Clemide to his companions. "It seems fitting that I should meet him alone." The two men hit each other again and again with effort, and Clemide felt that he had never faced such might. He was hammered to the ground and saw the other's sword hanging above his throat. "I offer you your life," said Parzival gravely, "but only if you give up all claim to this city and its queen, and you present yourself to the court of Arthur and pledge service there to a lady who was beaten because of me." Clemide gasped for breath one evening, "I think it is time, beloved, that I went to see how my mother fares." "Then make your absence as brief as you can," came the reply, "for I shall regret every moment of it." Soon after, Parzival rode out through the gates of Belle Ripière, the city of conduits d'amours, uncertain of his route